Welcome to this episode of Sharing Success. Thank you so much for joining me. In today's conversation, I am joined by Lisa Shumate. Lisa is the founder of Maximum Q, which is a leadership platform built on the idea that true intelligence is multi-dimensional. Lisa has got extensive leadership experience as the former executive director for Houston Public Media, and she's also a board member of PBS and the PBS Foundation. And in this conversation, we talk about leadership as a whole person journey and a 5Q framework, which really invites leaders to go beyond IQ and EQ into a much deeper awareness of how we think, how we connect, and how we show up. Let's get into it. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great, thank you.
Fantastic.
And
Thank
you?
you. I'm great. I'm all the better for having you join me today. So, as I was just saying before I hit record, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And for everybody who's listening, I was asking Lisa if she was ready, and this is a media queen, so of course she's more than ready.
Well, thank you. I have worn just about every microphone there is.
I love it.
So,
Exactly.
yes, I'm always ready for record. Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I guess let's just set the scene. You have been in leadership for many, many years, for decades, in fact. And in terms of where you've gained your leadership experience, you've led in some of the most prestigious and respected media organizations in the US. You've been on boards. And now you have your own organization, basically, where you're leading as well. So Maximum Q, which we'll go on to talk about in a lot of detail. So with all of this experience, I guess before we delve into Maximum Q, I'd love to go back to the beginning before, the boards and before Maximum Q. How did you what was your journey like, and what shaped your leadership philosophy to where it is today?
Thank you so much for having me on your show today, Antoinette. And I must say that I'm very fortunate in that I always knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't quite understand it was leadership. From the very earliest years of school, I was like class vice president, then class president, and head of the newspaper in high school, and things like that. The dance team, I became an officer in the dance team because I just had the energy for it. I think it's an energy thing. I was excited to pull people together and point them in a direction. But I must say the idea about media came from a woman who was an anchor woman in New Orleans, Louisiana. Her name is Angela Hill, and she is no longer an anchor woman, but she still is inspiring people just through the way that she is. And that is why I really believe representation is so important, because in those days, if you go back, there weren't even a lot of women on the anchor desk. She was the first woman anchor, much less women general managers and things like that, which running stations, which now there are. And so I thought I wanted to read the news and report. And I did enjoy that. And it gave me a lot of skills that transfer into leadership as far as communication and taking a lot of information and boiling it down. But I quickly found myself feeling a little stopped, by anchoring. I didn't want to move all around to do that. I never got the main gig of, the 10 o'clock news. And so I started thinking, what else could I do in media? And I started producing, and then I learned about sales, and then I learned about running teams, and it kind of went from there. And so it was, in a way, my plan B, but I didn't realize if you go back to what I was doing in the earliest years, it was leadership.
I love that. You said it was your plan B. Your plan B became the plan, the perfect plan.
It was absolutely the plan always. It took me a minute to realize it was really my plan A.
Definitely. And things are always clearer, aren't they? When you look backwards, it's always a lot clearer than when you're kind of in it.
For sure. For sure.
So you've clearly had an extremely kind of multifaceted career, and you must have learned so much. So in terms of, I guess, going from media to running your own business and to being on boards and having to impact in that way and making those kind of decisions over the years, how has your perspective on leadership and how you lead and your approach, how has that evolved, I guess, with the experience that you've had?
Well, I go back to the earliest days of being in media because if you think about it, you are put out in most people's worst day, whether it is a fire in their home, whether it is they have to go before city council of something they're trying to put forward, whether it is they're on trial, or after a natural disaster, a hurricane. I was in New Orleans, Louisiana. There were a lot of hurricanes and things exploding in the Gulf and things like that. Well, what that taught me is that is also part of life. There is a way you go about responding and building back. And so all of that transferred into leadership. Because if you were running a business or leading an organization, change is inevitable. Whether you're having to adjust budgets, whether you have overwhelmingly good luck sometimes that you have to maximize. We also had some natural disasters here in Houston. Hurricane Harvey devastated the city. It was a complete shutdown. I was running a television station at that time, and one of the other television stations where I worked, my former boss completely lost their facility. So they moved in with us and we had the room and we worked that out for 18 months. And so I think having the media experience and seeing and dealing with the unexpected every day changed the way I think about what's normal. What's normal is not no interruptions. What's normal is constant, incoming of challenges. So I think the two really helped me build a resilience and a resolve about this is temporary and there's going to be some opportunity that comes out of this. There's going to be some learning that comes out of this, as well as, yes, we're going to have some loss with this.
Wow. And maximum Q, which we'll be delving into that very shortly, the whole ethos of the framework, it's very human and person centered. And it's going far beyond obviously what we now understand as EQ and IQ, which is obviously what people talk about a lot in terms of leadership, and actually going beyond that to 5 Qs, which we'll go into in terms of your framework. So I guess through that journey and that experience, and I guess you've witnessed so much, that's the thing from what you've said, and you've talked about the fact that change is something that as a leader, you just have to be kind of comfortable with that. And it's part of the cause, and these disruptions, and it's almost like they're not disruptions. That is life. That is the thing. Was there ever a moment or, was there a specific pivotal point or experience which caused you to think that actually the way that leadership was happening, there was something missing, which kind of led you to then start thinking about these 5 elements of maximum Qs, 5 Qs?
Absolutely. I'm thinking about my earliest days. So I spent most of my career in commercial media, but the last almost 14 years, I was in public media. And public media, and as you know, in the United States anymore, there is no government support at all. It was always a fractional amount, it was never the full amount anyway. And so some stations, depending on the size of their grants, are suffering more than others. But even before all that happened, 14 years ago, I came into a situation where the organization had just not kept up with technology. Their finances and their will and their dreams about what they could do for the city were not met by the financial structure. And so I had to completely rebuild that with the team, of course, and with support from the University of Houston, where it is licensed. But through that, what I learned was this, Antoinette: you can always fix the money problems. You can never, it is much harder to fix trust. So the trust that this organization had in the community is what allowed us to say, all right, we're doing something different here. We're pulling these 2 operations, radio and TV, under one because we're going to a digital future where it, is all going to be on your phone anyway. And you have to make some hard decisions. So through that process, what I learned is trust is first and foremost with your customers, your supporters, your colleagues, your governing board. And then second, what will allow a big transformation is not your great vision or not your great financial plan, but the culture. that you create. And that is very much the embodiment of the leader. If the leader is not embodying that idea that we are about our people, do our people feel safe? And by safe, I don't mean here's where the exit is in case there's a fire. I mean safe that I can make a suggestion and it's going to be met and it's going to be heard. Or I can try something and it may not be great, but we'll learn from it and I'll get to try again. This idea that failure is part of it and I'm seen and I'm heard and I'm valued. That is what safety means. So that is very important. That's foundational to the culture. Then you build from there. And I think the other building blocks are empowerment, that they feel they're empowered to do their jobs, they have the resources to do their job. Of course, they're still checking in with the boss and staying accountable, if you will. And then the third one is that accountability piece. If you have favoritism, if you are not managing out people who aren't pulling their weight, then you really, again, that undermines culture. So that was my big learning when I started to think about this leadership development company, is to make leaders aware that yes, you can have your culture written on a piece of paper, you can have your values on the wall, but it's who you are and how you think that makes it all work.
I love that. And it's really going from, it's this idea that it's beyond the strategy. It's actually that it's who you become through this journey of leadership. And I love that. So it's very much about conscious leadership, isn't it? It's kind of consciousness and awareness and embodying that. Fantastic. So for everybody who's listening, let's kind of delve into maximum Q and these 5 Qs, which I keep on alluding to so meanly. So there's social, so social Q. There's career. There's presence. There is social career presence. If you had these, this was always going to happen to me.
Well, we only have 2 more to go. You got this.
Honestly, social career presence, outlook, which is such an important one. I think that one's such a kind of important and powerful one. And social career presence, outlook, and what's the 5th one? I've gone. You, exactly. It never say it's too obvious, but it's important. And so for everyone who's listening, as I say, who hasn't maybe heard of these principles or heard of this before, how do they all fit together then in the context of leadership?
Absolutely. Well, if you don't mind, I'll take a step back and talk about the name Maximum Q. And so I was putting this all together, and I was actually talking to my husband, who's a very big fan of aerospace. He's always watching what rocket is going where, and also he looks at the stars at night and everything. So I said, I'm playing with the name of the company. And I gave him the premise, and he said, well, I'd call it something like Max Q. So I looked up, what does max Q mean? Well, max Q is the point during a rocket's liftoff, about 1 minute into the journey, where there's maximum atmospheric pressure on the rocket. And it must pass that moment to continue its flight. And I thought that that's a lot about leadership. And usually, when people are in a new role, early in the role, there's a big challenge that tests them. And so maximum Q really captured what I was trying to do, with that it takes more than IQ, what you know, which is finite, EQ, your ability to self regulate. It leaves out a lot of other things that are important, which then I said, you need maximum Q. So, to your point, do you want me to take you through each Q?
Yes, please. Let's do that.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So the 5 Qs are Outlook Q. And that is also very important, because if I asked you, do you have a good outlook? You'll say, well, yes, I'm a pretty positive person. But then we have these stressors in our lives. I mean, there are 70,000 thoughts a day that go through our mind. Research has said 70,000. And most of them are either repetitive or negative. So, what do we do? How do we calm that ceiling fan spinning in our minds of all those thoughts? And add to that something that happens in the day. Let's say you are a supplier for Starbucks and someone comes in your office and says, hey, Starbucks is closing 80 stores. Well, as a supplier, you're right away thinking, and I do this in my teaching, and some people say, well, did we give them a muffin that somebody got sick? Or some people say, well, we need to really see if we need to cut our prices. Or somebody said, well, we need to look for, everybody went to the negative. When in fact, Starbucks closed 80 stores. They were trial stores to see mobile app only, to see, because we know certain generations, millennials and Gen Z, and not to stereotype because we all use our phone and we all use apps, wanted to see if that would work. But they quickly realized it was totally against their brand of getting people together for a wonderful conversation and a nice cup of coffee. So that is why they were closing 80 stores. And in fact, in Houston, they've expanded their number of stores. So right away, that's a test of your outlook. Do you immediately go to negative, that this is bad? And what it is most of the time is we don't like the unknown. So there's a great acronym. I didn't make it up, but I love it. Fabricated evidence, fabricated, made up evidence appearing real. FEAR, fear. So that is a big thing with our outlook. If change is coming at you, where's the opportunity? And that you always don't see it as a threat. So that's outlook. The next one is YQ, you. And this is so important because in addition to the 70,000 thoughts and the managing it and slowing down the ceiling fan and taking a positive approach, some of us have limiting beliefs, and those limiting beliefs can cause us to need more validation and more attention. And as a leader, you're the one supposed to be developing others. And if you're leaning on your team for affirmation that what you did was good or right, that is going to undermine your effectiveness. And worse, it's going to prevent any kind of development of your team. So we have to really look at our beliefs, that they are enabling, that we have to deal with our limiting beliefs, get them out of the room, kick them out. And then our values. If you're not clear about your values, you won't have the right framework for making good decisions. It might be that you're like, oh, well, that job pays 5,000 more. And then you jump and then you realize that company was going to pay more, but maybe what they're doing doesn't really align with what's meaningful work for you. But if we don't know and stop and think and just react and feel in a moment of scarce, I need to get more money, I don't have enough money, you can't make good decisions that way. So we get a really good handle on beliefs and values. The third thing is SQ, social cue. How are you with people? Now, this goes more than extrovert, introvert. Introverts can be amazing leaders because they know what it's like to be quiet and they really make sure everyone is heard. But the other thing we do with social cue is the team charter. Now, why do we do a team charter? Because in the workplace right now, we have 4 or 5 different generations. People in their 20s to literally people in their 70s who are on boards, or maybe they're running a law firm or a CPA firm, and they basically, a lot of them just don't retire. They stay active. So everybody comes to work with a different idea of what it means to work. Whether you grew up in a very top down where, you come to work, you do what the boss says, aren't you just grateful to have a job? Versus another type of mindset that says, well, I'm here. Of course I can do the work, but where's my voice in this? So a team charter allows for people to come together and say, this is what our values, this is how we work together, this is what's meaningful, this is how it aligns with the company, this is how we handle conflict, and have a conflict motto that we listen, we don't rush to judgment, or whatever it is they come up with. And then everyone signs it. So I had someone in one of my classes do this, and she so proudly sent me a 2-page document of their team charter. And she said, Lisa, I want you to know, besides the fact we have this team charter, and yes, we're going to do the quarterly check-in you recommended, it was such a good exercise for us. We got out of the building. We went to a coffee shop. We talked to each other. We laughed. And we put it all on paper, and they're very now motivated and engaged. And engagement is falling off the map for a lot of companies right now. Really bad statistics on engagement. So that's SQ, the team charter and that you're empowering your people while they hold themselves accountable, frankly, and they build the trust. The next one is PQ. And I wrote that with the idea of executive presence, but I think it's really two things. Presence, meaning you're not so busy, you're driven by time. You're always talking about that you can't be present. So you have to be present for your people. You also have to be the calm in a storm, like a lighthouse. Executive presence. Now, I've heard Brene Brown, who, worldwide famous writer, author, thought leader on leadership, and Adam Grant, another Atomic Habits and all that, have both decided the word executive presence is not relevant. It makes people feel excluded. And I get that. It's been used for code for a lot of women that they're not ready to move up. However, I want to say that executive presence, for my way of thinking, really is referring to the executive function of the brain. It's not about anything exterior, it's all interior. So the executive function of the brain is the one that engages in playing chess. You're thinking 2 and 3 moves ahead, as opposed to checkers, where you're just responding. So when I talk about executive presence, that's what I'm talking about. And also that ability to say a lot with a few words. A lot of people love to be leaders because they love to talk. They're not great listeners and they talk too much, frankly. So that's another thing we really focus on. Then the last one is career Q, CQ. That is, what is your system of support for your career? Now, what does that mean? I want you to think of crew and everybody rowing in the same direction. And one of those rows is that you have a mentor or a coach. One of those rows is you're active in your industry and you're making connections outside of your company. One of those rows is that you have made it known to your boss, hey, I'd like to move up. What do I need to do? How could I grow? And that you're having those conversations. You can't keep it a secret and expect people to know what you want to do. Another one would be your guardrails. Have you decided what are you willing to do? Are you willing to relocate, or are you willing to go for a lateral move to learn a new area? So those are the things that are really important for career Q. And when you put all that together, you have maximum Q. And I believe in keeping a journal and holding yourself accountable and checking in on each one of those Qs on a monthly or quarterly basis. And you will be setting a scaffolding for future growth.
I love that. Thank you so much for going through those with such clarity and conciseness. And yes, I mean, as you go through each of those, it makes so much sense, doesn't it? What it did, as you've kind of now gone through all of them, which of them do you feel is most commonly neglected among leaders, and why?
By far, Outlook Q.
Right.
I feel that so much information is coming in that they are focused on keeping their head above water and perhaps not delegating enough to the team, perhaps not having enough time to restore and refresh. And then that sets a bad example. Now, it's also the one that most people will tell you they have the most under control. And a lot of people are focused on that executive presence, that elusive, there's some quality I need to get. And that executive presence begins with your outlook.
Interesting, isn't it? It always starts in here, doesn't it?
It totally does, Antoinette. I can't tell you the number of people. And here's another thing that gets in the way of a good outlook and executive presence, and that's your relationship with time. Are you always talking about like a time cop? Like you're always, the meeting needs to start on time, like you are so rigid, right? Then that comes across as very judgmental. Or the opposite. Well, I'm the boss. I can be late. It won't start without me, right? So you have no discipline around time. And then the third one is that time scarcity. I'm just so busy. I'm overwhelmed. There's never enough time. Da, da, da. If you're saying those things, then you're not taking ownership of your time and of your calendar. You are the creator of time. How is something happening in your life that you haven't said yes to? So I think it's also important for leaders because what happens is you get moved up, you get asked to be on boards. It seems like it's the thing to do. And some of those board work is extremely fulfilling. And it's not just a yes, it's a hell yes. And some of the board work you feel like you have to do because you're supposed to be on a board. And so I think it's really important that we make sure if it's on our calendar, it's a hell yes. And anything else, especially those things, decisions that come in the door that they need to know now, if it has to be now, it has to be no. Take the time you need to make good decisions for you.
I love that. If it has to be now, it has to be no.
It has to be no.
That's fantastic. You've,
That
well,
is totally about the other person. Either
yes.
they haven't managed it well and they're cramming into you at the last minute, or they just want validation from you about something. No, no, you're not developing someone if you are enabling that.
Talking about the development piece, and you mentioned boards there as well, which we will definitely be kind of unpacking as well. In terms of the development piece, you have kind of mentored so many leaders at this point. What do you typically look for then in somebody who does want to get to that next level? What are the things you're looking for, both from a kind of career skills perspective, but actually also from those behaviors perspective that you've talked about?
Well, I believe people find you.
Mm.
I've never tapped someone on the shoulder and said, I want to mentor you. People come to you because there's something about you that they feel they can learn from. And by far, the people who have the talent are the ones that are most driven. If you suggest to them that they take a course, they take the course. If you suggest to them they try to get on a panel to get exposure, they do that. And so it's a combination of you shining a light on their potential and them picking it up and running with it. I really believe that. I believe that. And this is the other thing I believe, Antoinette. Everyone is uniquely resourceful, resilient, capable with God given gifts. I believe that of everybody. And then here's the one thing you can never find out from an assessment: free will. What are you willing to do? If you are willing, you want something and you are willing to put it out there and follow the steps and seek people out, and then you follow that advice, you don't make excuses or delay or whatever, you're going to get there.
Thank you so much. I love that. This is gold, all of the kind of advice and insights that you're providing here. In terms of the board piece, as you said, that can become the next stage or the next step for somebody. But obviously, I think for a lot of people hesitate or they think, oh, am I ready for that yet? I guess firstly, from in your own journey to kind of getting onto these boards, like the PBS board, what did you do to prepare yourself to be on that board and to be ready to kind of contribute to that board?
Thank you. Well, this is another thing where I believe if you're out there and you are just doing your work and engaged in your work, those opportunities come to you. I know that there's companies that help place people on boards. There are programs that try to, educate you about being on a board. And the ones that I've been on have been volunteer boards. Two things you have to know is you are assuming a little bit of risk, especially if you're on a corporate board, that you really have to understand the financials that are going on, if there are any major lawsuits going on, and you have to make sure the board, has adequate insurance, if you will, for their directors. It's not a prestigious thing. Is I guess prestigious, of course, but it is a responsibility to take very seriously, especially on the corporate board side, because sometimes companies get into big troubles and it floats all the way up to the board. In fact, some people might say it starts with the board, depending on, if they put the CEO in place and what all has occurred. So it's not to be taken lightly. Volunteer boards are different. Of course, you're not compensated. That doesn't mean they can't, get into trouble as well. They can. But I think the most important thing to know that if you are selected, or asked to be on a board, you have to get the governing committee. The governance committee will guide you about, in my case, you had to be elected by the general managers, as well as, the non-general managers on the board had to agree. So half of the PBS board is general managers, half of the board are lay specialists not in public media. And so they said, well, the process is you do write a letter. So you're not really campaigning, but you write a letter and you tell them why you're interested in this and what you see as the vision. And then all the general managers vote, and then that's how you get elected. And I think the most important thing once you're on the board is to remember why you are there. And I don't mean so much your mission. Yes, your mission, obviously, you care about the organization, but you are there to support the CEO. You are there to serve on committees, learn, ask questions, but you don't have to share every thought bubble that comes into your head. I've seen a lot of board members talk way too much, and just because they had to be heard, and they're not the ones who will get picked to lead committees or be vice chair or anything like that. So here is where your self-regulation, and your YQ and what your understanding is about your executive presence really come into play at the board level. Again, you are there as a trusted advisor and you are there to serve. It's not about padding your resume.
I love that. You've literally answered my next question, which was going to be, what is the difference between the reality of being on a board and serving on a board compared to what people think it is before they get onto one? What would you say? Is there anything additional that you want to add to that for anybody who is kind of going or getting onto one or invited to get onto one?
Right. Well, and a couple things I will say too. And there is an organization called 50/50 Women on Boards, because there's a big move to make sure that boards are 50% women. And again, that the representation of consumers are on these boards, right? So they really have a lot of information about that. But I think that it's really important to understand the organization and to know that the organizations, it's, if you are trying to get on a board and you're finding it difficult, it's not that you aren't a worthy person to be on the board. It's that whether there are 10 seats, 20 seats, 30 seats, they need a combination of expertise. Now boards are looking for people who know AI. They need lawyers. They need financial people who can look at their finances in a very detailed way. So you have to be a CPA and have really a good command of what that is. They have an investment committee. Are you able to really understand investments and what is risk and what is happening in the investment world? And then they need sometimes HR. They're looking for HR people who can talk to them about culture, about best practices for all the things that are important about keeping and maintaining a really good staff. Some of them are now hiring cybersecurity type people on their board, not hiring, but looking for that expertise, because that's such a big issue right now. So if you are not in one of those specialties, if you're a generalist, it's going to be harder to get on a corporate board. It just is. And you can't make yourself a specialist in that if you're at this stage of the career and you're not already one, right? And so for someone like me, my media background might be of interest to someone on a corporate board. Leadership might be of interest. But I realize that a lot of these boards are looking for some of the specialties I just described.
Thank you so much for those insights.
Now, smaller private organizations, might have a different philosophy or different needs around their boards.
The one thing I would add finally on the board piece is that I think one of the cues is obviously the outlook piece, and it's really about how you your perspective and how you look at things and your mindset. I think there's still probably people out there who, even if they were to be invited onto a board, they themselves may think, am I the right person, or am I ready, or am I that? So it's almost putting up barriers before themselves because they don't feel that they're necessarily ticking this box and that box, and it's their own self-doubt that's actually getting in the way. Would you agree that that is something that kind of holds some people back from even doing these types of things?
I think it can. And I think, in addition to holding you back on having conversations that you'd like to be on a board, it's probably also holding you back for appearing that you're ready. So self doubt has so many negative impact to you, because if you don't believe you should be at a table, you communicate that, and therefore you're not invited to the table. You've heard about imposter syndrome, and that's where people are invited to the table and they don't believe they should be there. And I always try to tell people, well, first of all, if they didn't think you should be there, they wouldn't have invited you. And to be an imposter is really just saying, I'm here to learn. I mean, what is the difference between learning and being an imposter? All it is that you are open to learning and you're not so tied up in being an expert that you can't lead and you can't learn. And that's another thing that can be very limiting to people. Is if I've talked to a lot of people who don't understand why they didn't get promoted because they know so much about marketing, let's just say, when in fact that's exactly why, because they couldn't let go of being an expert to be a leader. Once you're a leader, you're depending on others to know the nitty gritty. You're there developing them, and you're trying to learn other departments of the organization so you can lead many departments, not just marketing.
I love that.
So yeah, I think self-doubt, you have really hit on it, Antoinette. That is something, and we all struggle with it. Fear and self-doubt all the time. And it is of no use. It is negative energy. There is no return. And the worst thing it does is what you were saying before. It stops you. And I believe in my heart and my soul, the universe rewards action. It rewards movement. It rewards stepping out and learning, taking the risk. It rewards that. And self-doubt just keeps us in a box. And the more we doubt, the more we doubt.
Thank you. Just to kind of segue, you said the risk piece just then. So looking back in terms of your own career and the experiences that you've had and the opportunities that you've kind of taken, what do you feel, what were some of kind of the key decisions or the key risks that you've taken that you feel has been instrumental in kind of getting you to where you are today?
Well, it's funny. I think I didn't even see some of the things I've done as a risk. And part of it I felt was because everything seemed so logical to me. It didn't seem like a risk. So when it wasn't working out to be an anchor woman, it felt like the logical thing to do was to stay in media and do something else. And when this opportunity right here in Houston was in front of me to go from commercial media to public media, it seemed logical. That was going to allow me to move up and really try to learn something new. And so I think the biggest risk for me is what I'm doing right now. And that is I've never been an entrepreneur. I've never had to make a payroll. I've never had to not have income and have a bunch of expenses for many months, or as much less income than expenses for many months. So this is one of the riskiest things. And I have to remind myself that there's also a lot of excitement and energy behind the risk. And also, I believe in this mission, expanding the human capacity to lead. And so every day I wake up and I look and I think, is this going to work out? I stop myself and I say, what you're going to do is what's on your list to do today. And tomorrow you're going to get up and do what's on your list for tomorrow. And it is going to happen. I'm going to see it. I'm going to envision it. And I think it's going to happen. But this is by far the biggest risk I've ever taken.
I love it. I love it. But as you say, it's such an important mission. And I, for one, I'm glad that you're on this mission and doing this, because it's, I think, especially today and increasingly so every day, we need more conscious leaders. We need people to be more human centered. We need people who understand that it's a whole person thing and it is about you and kind of your journey as a leader and who you're becoming and who you are, because obviously you have such a huge impact that has kind of such a rippling effect, doesn't it?
It is, Antoinette, and we need people like you. We need people like you who are opening up the forum for a conversation to get the word out. So I'm so grateful that you're doing this work.
Thank you so much. Before we start to kind of close off, you talked about the fact that this mission is really important to you. Who are your clients then? Kind of perhaps give us, you talked about some of the wonderful transformations that you've witnessed and seen happen. Tell us about the types of people that you work with as clients, and maybe give us one example of an organization or a team that you've worked with where you saw such a positive change.
Excellent. Well, one of my favorite groups is a group called Leadership Houston. And Leadership Houston is a nonprofit program. And every year they pull together 50 people who apply to do a service project in Houston. And that is what their leadership journey is. And so they come together, they do a weekend retreat, and we do a Berkman assessment for them, so that they can get to know themselves and learn about that self-regulation and things like that. And we do a little part of the 5 Qs. There's not enough time to do all 5, but we talk a lot about outlook. And then this group meets again and again and again to work together. So that's why what we do at the first is so important, to show how they're all different, and so that they can be very functional in a group to do this service project with people they've never met before. And then throughout the year, they experience different, they go and see government, they go into different museums, and they experience different aspects of Houston. And then at the end, they have this big unveiling. But what I love about that group is we start off and they get to see how really different they are. But by the end of that time, they get to appreciate how different they are. And there's a closeness and a bond that happens, and a way to communicate with each other and understanding that they didn't have before. That's one of my favorites.
I love that.
I also love working. So that is a format that is all day, a lot of information. I also love coaching. And a couple of my coaching clients are in big transitions right now. Their company is undergoing a big merger, and the other one, she is making a career pivot. And what happens in those times of change with the right partner is you see the opportunity and not that a scarcity. Again, this is change. Something's being taken away from me. And so I love working with that. The other thing I love is I'm putting together an extended leadership program where we meet once a month for 5 months in person. Antoinette, this is so important that we get together. 14 people, 15 people rather, no more. And we go through 9:30 to 1:30, a workshop of one of the Qs each time we meet, an opening dinner, a closing dinner, and virtual sessions in between to support each other and say, how are we putting that in action? So those are the ways, and those are individuals from different companies. So I either get hired by a company to do a group, work individually, or you're joining my leadership program. Because transformation is what happens when you realize your capacity to lead.
I love that. I absolutely love that. What's your kind of ultimate vision for Maximum Q, and the kind of legacy that you want to be leaving behind with the organization?
Well, I think one of the most impactful books I ever read was 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. It's still today, it's so clear, it's so basic, it's so wonderful to help you realize you've got this. I would love to feel that Maximum Q could have that impact with the 5 Qs. So beyond what I'm able to do, I am going to be affiliating with coaches to teach the program and become Maximum Q certified and be able to spread it farther and wider than what one person could ever do.
I love that. Fantastic. So for anybody who's listening, who's thinking, oh my goodness, I need to get on my Maximum Q journey, what is the best way for them to find out more and to get in contact?
Well, a good step would be MaximumQ.com is the website. And if you go to the section that says contact, you can fill out a little form. I'm interested in coaching. I'm interested in a boot camp. I'm interested in a public speaker. You can fill out that. So then we can get right back to you and then, see how we could work together. But it's MaximumQ.com. And then you just Or you can, I have a newsletter you can subscribe to that comes out once a week. But I'd love to be able to communicate with you and hear where you are on your leadership journey.
Fantastic. Thank you so, so much, Lisa. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've really appreciated all of the kind of knowledge and wisdom and insights and advice and guidance, quite frankly, that you've offered. Really appreciate it.
Antoinette, thank you so much. And hello to everyone who is listening to you overseas. I'm here in Houston, Texas, and I know that you have a global audience. And so it's been an honor to spend this time with you.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I definitely enjoyed talking to Lisa, and I found that to be a very interesting conversation. More importantly, I hope it got you thinking about, what leadership means to you, not just in terms of results and titles, but in terms of who you become in that process and in that journey. So next week, I will be joined by Christina DiPaolo. Christina is a coach who calls herself an iconoclast, and she works with organizations and individuals, and she helps them to let go of and release old identities that are no longer serving them so that they can really step up into a new level of who they are as an organization or as an individual. So until next time, have a fantastic week, and I'll catch you then.